All right, so guys, we just started a project, a narrative essay, right? And the first step, if you remember, was to collect information. It was to interview somebody, get a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and to take copious notes. Write down every single important element you can think of, because I want to see that in your information, in the notes that you take, right? Now, we're working into the second part of this, but before we do that, I want to show you a few pictures. Okay, so here we are back on my iPad. Let me load up some images for you to look at. Here we go. Here's what I want you to do. Look at these pictures and see if you can figure out the connection. What do they all have in common with each other? This first one is a coral. Another coral, but it's dried up this time. Saguaro cactus. This is a slime mold. Do you notice the connection yet? Are you noticing physically how these things are related to each other? A lightning strike. You seeing that shape? This is an aerial photo of the Amazon River. And the root system of a tree. The top of a tree. You must see it now. You see that structure. See how it starts at a base, and then it branches off, and then those branches branch off, and those branch off. It's just a series of branching. The veins in a leaf, same structure. Your circulatory system. You've got your heart in the middle, and the main branches off from the heart would be the arteries. And then the arteries branch off into smaller and smaller blood vessels, basically, until you get to the smallest ones, which are called capillaries. You know what that is? That's a brain cell. All the branching off, those are called dendrites. The little white guy in the middle, that's the actual living cell, what your brain is made up of. There's an interesting thing about dendrites. You can actually grow these. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But if you challenge your brain to do something new or out of the ordinary, it actually grows these dendrites. And these dendrites are how your brain cells communicate to each other. So, this is a mapping technique. Do you notice the similarity between this map and those shapes that I just showed you, right? All the branching off, look at that. The brain cell and the dendrites look just exactly like this thing. It's borrowing basically from nature in order to create a map. Now, here's why this is such an interesting idea. There was a time when we thought of the act of thinking as being a very linear action, and most models of thinking reflected that. The standard model of thinking was that, for example, when we had ideas or when we learned something, it happened in a straight line. Here's what I mean by that, all right? Let's say that I already have thought A, right? And then I learned something new, and that leads me to thought B. And then when I understand that, that leads to further understanding, which leads me to thought C, which leads me to thought D. It's very linear. It's just a line of thinking. And it's not that that's wrong. It's a model of how thinking happens. But since then, we've taken into account other things that we've learned about the brain and the mind and how it works. For example, that model that I just showed you, that pattern that shows up in nature, it even shows up in your brain. That brain cell that I showed you with the dendrites, your brain is hardwired to represent that pattern. Well, if that's the case, maybe your thinking does as well. And honestly, it does. For example, whenever we learn something new or hear something, very often we have other information that we already had, right? This thing that I just learned in bio class, for example, reminds me of something that I saw once in a documentary on TV. So that was something I already knew, which was thought why, right? And understanding thought why leads me to something slightly different over here, which allows me to make a bit of a skip here, a jump to thought C. I got kind of advanced in my thinking without even hearing what B was because of prior information that I had. And that leads me to thought D. And that reminds me of something I once read in an article, which leads me blah, 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 blah. Do you see how these thoughts are all over the place, but they're reinforcing each other? That's another model of thinking, basically. It's a web of thoughts, a cluster of thoughts, which takes us back to this map that I'm showing you. So let's go back and reconsider this map. Can you see how there are rules about how this map is put together? For example, let's compare this to an outline, right? An outline would be a very linear way of thinking of something. Whenever you had to write an essay, for a lot of previous English teachers, they probably had you create a formal outline. Remember what I'm talking about? The Roman numeral with a major idea, and then there's a capital letter underneath that with a subset, and then there's a small number underneath that, and then there's a Roman number underneath that. These are all subsets of ideas. That was how you made a formal outline before writing an essay. Well, I'm going to argue that this map does exactly the same thing, but just in a slightly different method. The information is all still there, and the connections being made are all still there, but it's forcing you to look at it in a different way. And the supposed advantage here is that if your brain is hardwired to think that way, and if that is a more accurate model of how the brain thinks, well then why shouldn't you use that model when you're trying to map out the thoughts that are in your brain, okay? For example, before you write an essay, you don't necessarily have to do a formal outline to organize your thoughts. You could do it in a very visual way with a map like this. So let's consider what the rules of this map actually are. What do you notice? What stands out to you? The first thing I notice always with these maps, and by the way, they're called mind maps. You can see that in the title there because they represent how your mind is put together, basically, right? The shape of your thoughts. That's why it's called a mind map. Notice the color. There are different ways you can use color. In this case, this guy used color to show the subsets, okay? His main idea that holds everything together is the uses of mind maps. And then when you look at those individual uses as we break down the information, kind of like we did with the topic sentence and supporting details, right? The topic sentence would be the middle there, uses of mind map, and the supporting details would be those different branches that represent different colors. Recall, presentations, planning, meetings. These are all different ways you can use a mind map, right? He's breaking down this idea. And then he doesn't stop there. He goes to a third level of information, like we talked about in paragraph structure when we were talking about evidence or examples, right? Those are going to be those small or little tiny blood vessels, right? The dendrites. And that's how he breaks it down even further. That's one way of thinking of doing the color. We're going to talk about a slightly different way, but we're still going to use color. But you can see that color is very important in mind mapping, right? Color is great because not only does it help you to remember things, it also causes you to just think differently about things, right? Because color stands out immediately. Do you notice the use of pictures? In mind mapping, that's totally legitimate because the idea is to have as few words as possible and as much information as possible. It's almost like writing a poem, right? A poem can be very, very small, but it can contain so much information. A mind map is kind of like a visual poem because it's using as few words as possible to convey the same amount of information that, say, a page full of text would contain. There's a lot of information here, and if you look at these individual pictures, they represent something to the author of this. The guy who took these notes used those pictures in place of or with words in order to convey more information. So if you want to use images in your mind map, it's perfectly legitimate to do that. So we've got the colors, we've got the images, and I already mentioned very few words. You don't see any sentences on here, do you? Again, that's for a reason. It's because a few words, even one word, can convey just as much information as a sentence. And that's what's going on here. So the idea of the few words basically is to make it more visual, to have all that information right there at the ready, and you don't have to do a whole lot of reading to get to it. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this mapping technique is because it's going to take the place of a more formal way of starting an essay. This is a different way of presenting the same information, but in a much more visual way, okay? Here's how this is going to work. You're going to have a main idea, the thing that holds together your whole essay, and we're going to start in the middle. I'm going to make mine a heart because I think it's a neat analogy, right? But you can make yours whatever you want. If it's a bubble, if it's a box, doesn't matter. You just need some kind of a shape there in the middle of this map that's going to hold everything together. And in particular, this time in this essay, it's going to be composed of 3 parts. This is not true of all essays. It's just this particular assignment for a narrative essay, okay? So understand that. It just applies to this one assignment. These 3 parts are going to compose your main idea, which is going to become your thesis statement. Here's what they are. You're going to answer these 3 questions. Who, what, and why? Who did you interview? What is the thing that happened to them? And it's not why did it happen. A lot of people go off on that. That's not it. It's why is it significant? And that's incredibly important because if there's no significance to the story, there's no reason for the story, right? The whole point of this essay is to point to the lesson learned, something that changed someone in a very profound way. That's significant. So what was that significance? Why was it significant to this person? Why did they feel compelled to tell you this story and share it with you? If you don't know, then go back and ask the person because you're going to need that information. Like I said, it holds everything together. So it's a key piece of information. So go back and fill in these 3 questions. Now, let's do a practice one, okay? I'm going to make up a story. My who is Jerry. My buddy Jerry, I interviewed Jerry, okay? So I'm going to write Jerry right there. What happened to Jerry? Jerry had an appendicitis. You know how when your appendix grows inside because it's blocked or something like that, and it can actually burst open and it can be really dangerous. That's it. It's a really common thing to happen. Jerry had an appendicitis. So I'm going to write that for the what? Appendicitis. Why? Why is it significant? So in other words, did Jerry learn some kind of lesson because this thing happened to him? Yes, he did. He learned to take his health more seriously and take care of himself. That's going to be the why. So I'm going to write those answers right there. Jerry, appendicitis, learn to take care of his health. Then I'm going to forget about it, okay? Move on. Once you've got that information, the rest of this map, the whole point of this map is to take these elements and give them some order, basically, okay, to help with the composition of the essay. This is going to be helpful when we're actually writing the essay. We're going to need that information because this is going to write our thesis statement for us, and that's one of the most important parts of an essay. So once you've got this information, don't worry about it anymore, okay? Now, I want you to think about the story. And to tell the story, you're going to go into the second level of information. In this case, it's going to be those arteries, right? So here we go. I'm going to give it 3 arteries because that's how we're going to divide up our essay. And it's going to have 3 body paragraphs. Each of those body paragraphs is going to have a topic sentence, and that's what these 3 green arteries are going to lead up to, okay? So I'm even going to name them. Here is the beginning of the story. Here's the middle of the story. And here's the end of the story. Those are the 3 body paragraphs. Second level of information. Now, let's get to the third level of information. That is basically telling the story, okay? And that's why it gets my 3rd color, because it's doing something different than those other elements. And at the end of each one of those little tiny blood vessels, these would be the capillaries, right? The tiniest ones. I'm putting a bubble because that bubble is going to contain some information. And those bubbles are going to tell the story, okay? So basically, just think of it as a chronology of ideas. First this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and that's the beginning of the story. The middle of the story, then this happened, and then this, and then this, and then this. Now, I just put 4 bubbles for the hell of it, okay? That's just what I put there. That doesn't mean I'm looking for 4 bubbles. In fact, I'm probably looking for more than that in your map, because chances are the beginning of the story has more than just 4 sentences, okay? 4 events that happened. So whatever it takes, I'm not counting bubbles, but whatever it takes, I do want to see a complete story on this map. So make it as complete as you can, okay? Don't make it too sparse. The more work you put into this, the more points you're going to get. And yeah, you are going to get points for this, okay? This is taking the place of a formal outline. So it's going to be a necessary part of writing the essay. So do this map and hold on to it, because at some point you're going to submit it when you submit the essay, okay? Now, back to the map itself. Start thinking about those 3 parts, beginning, middle, and end, and how they're going to divide up the story. Here's a really easy way of thinking about it. Basically, it centers around the thing that happens. In this case, it was an appendicitis. I'm not going to just start my story with an appendicitis, because honestly, that's not the beginning of the story. Something led up to that appendicitis happening, and that's actually the beginning of the story. So my first sentence is not going to be, Jerry had an appendicitis. I just gave away the whole story. Now nobody wants to read it because they already know what happened, right? I gave away the most important part. You should be leading up to that part, right? You should be rising action. You should be giving details that are explaining what's leading up to this thing happening right there at the top, right? So before I even mention an appendicitis, I'm going to drop some clues in the story. For example, I could start it like this. Jerry woke up that morning feeling a little bit woozy, okay? That is a great detail, because can you see how that's leading up to the appendicitis, which is going to be the middle of the story? He woke up that morning feeling woozy. He could smell downstairs his mom was cooking bacon, and usually that's his favorite smell, but this morning it made him feel sick to his stomach. He noticed that his stomach on the side was hurting a little bit. He also felt a little bit feverish. Another detail, it was picture day. He should have stayed home, and he knew that, but he decided to go to school anyway because he didn't want to miss picture day, blah, 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 blah. Anything that's setting up this appendicitis, those details are going to go right here. Okay, that's the beginning of the story. Now, middle of the story, that's when I can give the thing away. That's when the thing that happened is going to happen, all right? He was in the middle of the class, and he started to feel really lightheaded. Before he knew it, he passed out right at his desk. The next thing he knew, he woke up in an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and there was an EMT there, and the EMT said, we think you might be having an appendicitis, and so we're taking you to the hospital to get some more tests done, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, right? This is the appendicitis happening. Now, the end of the story is after the thing happens, okay? So whatever the thing is, after it happens, there's an aftermath. There are things that happened after that happened. He woke up in a hospital bed, and there was a nurse standing next to them. She told him it was actually an appendicitis, and she said that the surgeon got to him just in the nick of time. It was just about to explode, basically. And if that happened, it could have been really dangerous, and it could have caused him to lose his life. And he realized how important it is to listen to his body and not to push it too hard, and to be aware when something's wrong. These are all the details that happen after the thing happens. And that's it. That's primarily how this thing is put together, okay? 3 elements to the main idea, and those elements are chronological elements. We're talking about time, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So focus. Once you've got those 3 questions answered, now focus on the information. All those bullet points that were on your notes, each one should go into a bubble, okay? And this is where you can give this thing some form. And if you notice that you had some really good details that were out of order because the person you interviewed was telling the story a little bit out of order, he kept skipping back and forth in time, well, you can fix that here, okay? If something happened in the beginning, put it right there. If something happened at the end, put it over here. This is it. This is a really important step in creating this essay. It's part of the process. And like I said, this is going to be worth some points. So what I want you to do now, okay, for today, work on this map. Take those notes that you took when you were interviewing somebody and put it into the format of a mind map. I want to see those 3 colors, right? Because there's 3 different levels of information. And then once you've done that, stop there and I'll give you the next piece the next time we talk. All right, that's it for today. Work on this, and I will speak to you soon.